Welcome to the Blackout Witness. When the power goes out, everything changes. Streets turn silent, houses become shadows, and for a few minutes, the world feels much bigger and much less safe. Tonight's stories come from people who saw something during those dark hours. Some were alone, some had nowhere to run, and some still do not know what was watching them when the lights finally came back on. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a slow, unsettling feel, subscribe to the Blackout Witness. Turn off the lights, if you dare. Let's begin.
When I was 13, I went on a fishing trip in Florida with my family. The trip itself had been planned as something relaxing. We were supposed to spend time on the water, enjoy the weather, and come home with a few stories about fish that got away. I did come home with a story, but it had almost nothing to do with fishing. It began at the marina, as our boat was heading out. Marinas are usually busy places, especially in Florida. There are fishermen loading coolers, people carrying rods, workers tying boats to docks, and tourists trying to stay out of everyone's way. There are engines starting, ropes hitting wooden posts, birds calling overhead, and water moving between the boats. Most people blend into that activity. But I noticed one man standing near the marina. He looked to be in his 50s or early 60s. His skin was extremely tanned and heavily wrinkled, the kind of appearance someone might develop after spending decades working outdoors or on the water. He wore a do-rag and dark sunglasses. I cannot remember every detail of his clothing, but I remember his face and general appearance clearly enough that I recognized him later. He looked like someone who had lived most of his life near boats. As our boat passed, he turned his head and looked directly at me. The movement was extremely fast. 1 second, he seemed to be facing another direction. The next, his head snapped toward me, as though he had felt me watching him. Even with the sunglasses covering his eyes, I had the strong impression that he was looking straight into mine. Then he turned away just as quickly. It was a small moment. He did not speak to me. He did not wave or follow the boat. He only looked. But something about him made me uncomfortable. I remember having a very specific thought. This crazy guy is going to go missing. I'll tell my parents, and no one will believe me. It was not a normal thought for me to have. I did not usually look at strangers and imagine they were about to disappear. I could not explain why that idea entered my mind. Maybe it was his appearance. Maybe the fast turn of his head startled me. Perhaps he looked isolated, tired, or unwell. At 13, I may have interpreted an ordinary fisherman's rough appearance as something more threatening or tragic. But the thought stayed with me as we left the marina. I did not say anything to my parents. There was nothing useful to tell them. A strange-looking man had glanced at me. That was not a warning or an emergency. The boat continued toward open water, and the marina disappeared behind us. For the rest of the day, I tried to focus on the trip. I watched the coastline grow smaller. I looked at the water, fishing equipment, and everything happening around me. The man remained somewhere in the back of my mind, but there was no reason to believe I would ever see him again. The trip continued for several days. On our final day, the weather turned bad. It was rainy, and we were indoors watching local television. I do not remember exactly what I was doing when the news came on. I may have been waiting for the rain to pass or simply sitting with the rest of the family. Then a photograph appeared on the screen. It was the man from the marina. The same deeply tanned skin, the same wrinkled face, the same general age, the same sunglasses and durag or at least an appearance close enough that I recognized him immediately. For a moment, I assumed the report was about something that had just happened. I thought my strange prediction had somehow come true during our trip. Then I heard the details. The man had not gone missing recently. According to the news report, he had disappeared 2 months earlier. The search had finally been called off. He had gone missing while deep-sea fishing. The report showed the boat that had been found. It appeared to be the same boat he had been standing on when I saw him at the marina. That was the detail that truly frightened me. If the report was accurate, the man should not have been there. He had vanished at sea 2 months before our trip. His boat had apparently been recovered, and the official search was ending. Yet I remembered seeing him alive at the marina only days earlier. I remembered the boat. I remembered his head turning toward me. I remembered thinking that he was going to disappear. It felt as though I had seen someone after he was already missing. I did not tell my family. Part of me wanted to point at the television and say that I had seen him. But I knew how it would sound. I was 13. I had only seen the man briefly as our boat passed. I did not know his name. I had not taken a photograph. I had not told anyone about him at the time. Now the news was showing a missing fisherman, and I was claiming I had seen him alive on the very boat connected to his disappearance. My parents would probably say it was a different man. They might assume I was confused by the television report or trying to make the story more exciting. Even I knew that mistaken identity was possible. The man on the news may only have resembled the person at the marina. Florida marinas contain many older men with deeply tanned skin, sunglasses, weathered faces, and head coverings. Someone who spends years fishing may develop a very recognizable type of appearance, but several people can share it. From a moving boat, I did not have much time to study him. The sunglasses hid a large part of his face. The do-rag covered his hair. Those two details removed many of the features people normally use to distinguish one person from another. I may have seen the photograph on the news and forced the resemblance to become exact. The story of his disappearance gave the earlier encounter emotional importance. A stranger I might otherwise have forgotten became the missing fisherman. That is the simplest explanation. I saw one man at the marina. Days later, I saw another man's photograph on television. They looked similar. My mind decided they were the same person. Still, the match felt complete. It was not only the face. The report showed the boat, and I believed it was the same boat he had been standing on. That combination seemed far too specific. But boats can also look similar. Fishing vessels are often built in common styles and colors. At 13, I did not know enough about boats to identify a particular model or recognize unique details. A white hull, certain windows, and similar equipment might be enough for me to believe two vessels were identical. The news report may have shown stock footage, an older photograph, or a boat of the same type rather than the exact recovered vessel. I cannot now remember whether the man was definitely standing on the boat itself or only beside it at the marina. Over the years, the memory may have become more precise. Perhaps I originally saw him near a boat that looked similar. After the news report, the two images joined. Now I remember him standing on the exact vessel. Memory does not preserve events like a recording. It rebuilds them. Every time I recall that day, the man at the marina and the missing fisherman on television become more connected. Details from the news may have entered the original memory. The boat becomes identical. The clothing becomes exact. The turn of his head becomes more sudden. The prediction, in my mind, becomes clearer. That does not mean I invented the experience. I did see a man who strongly resembled the missing fisherman. The question is how exact the resemblance truly was before later information reshaped it. There is also a possibility that the news report contained outdated or incomplete information. The man may not have been legally confirmed dead. He was missing. A search ending does not necessarily mean authorities know the person died. Perhaps he survived and returned without immediately contacting the right people. Maybe he reached another marina, traveled under different circumstances, or avoided being identified. If I truly saw him, the ordinary explanation could be that he was alive and had not yet been located officially. A person missing at sea might be rescued by another private boat. They could reach shore far from the original search area. Confusion, injury, fear, legal problems, or personal reasons might delay contact with family or authorities. But if he had been standing openly on his own recovered boat at a public marina, it seems unlikely nobody recognized him. A missing fisherman whose case appeared on local television would probably be known around the marina community. Other boat owners, workers, or law enforcement officers might notice him. If his vessel had been officially found abandoned, it should not have been casually back in his possession without anyone updating the story. Maybe the television report had been recorded earlier and was only being replayed. The search could have ended before the man reappeared, while the broadcast did not yet include the latest information. Local news sometimes repeats prepared segments throughout the day. A person could be found after a report was produced, but before it aired again. However, the report apparently treated him as still missing, and I never heard that he had returned. I also do not remember seeing a later correction. That does not mean one never happened. We were visitors. After the trip, we left the area. A local update could easily occur without us hearing about it. Another possibility is that the man I saw was a relative. Family members often resemble one another strongly. A brother, son, cousin, or other relative might have looked almost identical, especially from a distance and behind sunglasses. He may even have been using the missing man's boat or assisting with matters connected to it, if the family had recovered personal belongings or a similar boat. That could explain why both the man and vessel looked familiar. A brother close in age could share the same sun-damaged skin, facial shape, and style of clothing. From a passing boat, I might never notice the differences. This explanation is ordinary and plausible. There could also have been another fisherman who intentionally copied the missing man's style, though there would be no reason to assume that. The marina sighting itself may have happened earlier than I remember. Perhaps we saw the man in footage, a poster, or a photograph before the trip without consciously noticing. Missing person posters might have been displayed around the marina if I saw his image near the entrance. My mind could later create a memory of seeing him physically standing there. This is a form of source confusion. The brain remembers the person, but attaches the wrong source to the memory. Maybe there was a missing notice featuring his face and boat. I looked at it briefly while boarding. Later, as our vessel passed an older fisherman, the two images combined. When the same photograph appeared on television, I felt that I had seen the missing man alive. I do not remember any poster, but that absence does not rule it out. People take in details without consciously storing where they came from. The strange thought I had about him going missing could also be explained that way. If I had already glimpsed a missing person notice, some part of my brain may have recognized him. The idea that he would go missing was not a prediction. It was a fragment of information I had seen without fully understanding. This possibility interests me because the thought was so specific. Why would I look at a random man and imagine he would disappear? Perhaps I had unconsciously noticed a poster or news image before. My conscious mind did not remember it, but the idea of disappearance was already connected to his face. Then, when I saw a similar-looking person, the thought surfaced. Later, the television report made the entire sequence seem prophetic. It is also possible that the man's behavior caused the thought. He may have looked distressed, exhausted, or mentally unwell. Perhaps he was alone on a boat that appeared damaged. Maybe he moved in an erratic way or stared too intensely. At 13, I could sense something unusual without having the vocabulary to describe it. My mind turned that discomfort into a dramatic sentence. This man is going to go missing. The prediction may sound supernatural now, but it could have been a child's response to subtle warning signs. Still, if the news report was correct, he had already disappeared 2 months earlier. The thought would then not be a prediction, but a strange recognition. The fast head turn remains one of the details I remember most clearly. The man seemed to notice my gaze instantly. He turned toward me so quickly that it felt almost inhuman. Perhaps he simply heard our boat engine or sensed movement beside him. People often turn toward passing vessels. With sunglasses covering his eyes, I could not know whether he was actually looking at me or at someone else aboard. Because I was already watching him, the movement felt personal. The angle may have made his head turn appear sharper than it was. He then looked away, which was a completely normal response to a passing boat. My fear gave the movement more meaning later. If I had been an adult with a phone, I might have taken a picture. At 13, I did not think to do that. I also did not tell my parents about the prediction before the news report. That makes the memory impossible to verify. If I had said, "That man looks like he is going to disappear," and my family later saw the report, there would be independent confirmation that I had noticed him. Instead, the prediction existed only in my mind. After seeing the news, I could unintentionally create or strengthen the earlier thought. Maybe what I originally thought was simply, "That man looks strange." After learning he was missing, the memory became, "That man will go missing." This kind of retrospective prediction happens often. People remember dreams, feelings, or thoughts that seem to forecast later events. The later event gives the earlier memory a clearer form. Again, this does not mean dishonesty. It is how memory searches for meaning. The emotional shock of the news may have rewritten the thought almost instantly. I was frightened and trying to understand why I had noticed the man so strongly. The idea that I had predicted his disappearance provided an explanation. The supernatural interpretation is that I saw the missing fisherman after his death. Perhaps he had drowned during the deep-sea trip, and what stood at the marina was an apparition. He appeared beside or on the boat connected to his disappearance, because that was where he still belonged. When our boat passed, he sensed that I could see him. He turned directly toward me. Then he looked away and allowed us to continue. Days later, the news revealed who he was. That interpretation explains why the sighting felt so unusual and why the prediction entered my mind. Maybe some part of me recognized that he did not belong among the living. But it raises many questions. If he was a ghost, why did he appear clearly enough to look like an ordinary man? Did anyone else at the marina see him? Was he physically standing on a boat, or did he only appear from my angle? Why would he wear sunglasses and a do-rag after death? Perhaps apparitions appear as they looked in life, especially in familiar places. But that is an idea from stories, not evidence. A residual image is another supernatural possibility. Some people believe locations connected to strong emotion or repeated routines can replay images of the past. The fisherman may have stood at that marina many times before his disappearance. I could have witnessed one of those moments repeating. The quick head turn might have been part of an old action rather than a response to me, but I felt that he looked directly at me. If the image reacted, it would not be a simple recording. It would be something aware. There is also the possibility that he was not dead at the time I saw him, even if the search was ending. The news said he had been missing. not necessarily confirmed deceased. If the sighting was real, perhaps I saw him secretly returning. Maybe he had chosen to disappear. People sometimes vanish deliberately because of debt, family problems, criminal activity, or a desire to begin a new life. A man who staged his disappearance during a fishing trip might later return to retrieve something or meet someone at a marina. His quick look toward me could come from fear of being recognized. The boat might have been part of the plan. The fact that the search ended only days later could mean authorities had already concluded he was unlikely to be found, allowing him to move with less attention. But standing openly near the same vessel would be extremely reckless. A local marina would be one of the first places people knew his face. A disguised appearance would make more sense. Yet, he apparently wore the same distinctive style shown on television, unless he did not expect a 13-year-old tourist to know who he was. This explanation turns the event into a human mystery rather than a paranormal one. It is possible, though there is no evidence that he staged anything. He may also have been involved in illegal activity at sea. The disappearance and recovery of the boat could contain details the news did not report. Perhaps authorities knew more than they revealed. A person officially listed as missing may have been seen elsewhere while an investigation continued. But I was a child watching one short local news segment. I cannot reconstruct the entire case from that. The responsible conclusion is that I probably saw another fisherman who strongly resembled the missing man. The marina, weathered appearance, sunglasses, and fishing clothes created a convincing match. The boat was likely similar rather than identical. My strange thought was either coincidence or memory sharpened after the news. The sudden head turn was ordinary movement made unsettling by later information. This explanation requires no ghost, staged disappearance, or break in time. It is the one I would give someone else who told me the same story. But when the memory belongs to you, logic does not remove the feeling. I still remember that man standing near the marina. The Florida light made every wrinkle in his skin seem deeper. His face looked worn by sun and salt. The black sunglasses hid his eyes. The do-rag covered his head. Our boat moved past him. Then his head turned toward me with unnatural speed. For one instant, I felt recognized by a stranger. I thought he would disappear. Days later, rain kept us indoors on the final day of the trip. The local news showed his face. The report said he had already been missing for 2 months. The search was over. He had vanished during a deep-sea fishing trip. Then, the screen showed the boat. I believed I had seen him standing on it. I did not speak because I knew the story sounded impossible. I was only 13, and I had no proof. By remaining silent, I also made sure the event could never be checked. Perhaps my parents would have recognized the man. Maybe someone could have called the station or police. A marina worker might confirm that a similar person had been there. A photograph of the recovered boat could be compared with my memory. None of that happened. The moment passed. We left Florida. The story stayed with me. I have wondered whether I should have said something, even if I was wrong. If the man was alive, a sighting might have helped. But I did not know his name, the marina slip, or any exact identifying information. By the time the news aired, days had passed. A report from a frightened teenager who saw someone briefly would probably not have changed the search. And if the man was only a look-alike, it might have caused confusion for a grieving family. Silence was understandable. It also preserved the mystery. The event remains divided into 2 possible realities. In one, I saw an ordinary fisherman. His appearance happened to match a missing man shown on television. The boats looked similar, because fishing boats often do. My memory connected the 2 encounters and sharpened the resemblance over time. Nothing impossible happened. In the other reality, our boat passed a man who had already vanished at sea. He stood on the vessel connected to his disappearance as though he had returned to the marina one final time. He felt me looking. His head snapped toward me. Some part of me understood what he was before I had any facts and produced the thought that he was going to disappear. Then the news told me that he already had. I know which explanation is more likely. I also know what I remember. The strongest part is not the television report by itself. It is the moment of eye contact. Even though his eyes were hidden, he did not merely happen to be standing there. He seemed to notice me. That is why I still wonder whether I saw the wrong man, the right man at the wrong time, or something that only looked alive because I had not yet learned it was missing. Even now, when I picture the marina, I see our boat pulling away from the dock. Engines rumble. Water moves between the vessels. People continue with their work. Among them stands one deeply tanned man in dark sunglasses and a do-rag. He turns his head toward me so quickly that the rest of the marina seems to slow down. Then, he looks away. Days later, a television says he had been gone for 2 months. His search had ended. His boat had been found. Yet in my memory, he is still standing on it, watching our boat leave as though he already knows I will recognize him when the news finally tells me who he was. The strongest detail is that both you and your twin still remember the same impossible movement. A tiny poke, followed by her crossing the room and hitting the wall. I'm keeping that shared memory, your grandfather's ordinary explanation, and the uncertainty between balance, childhood perception, memory, and something that seemed to ignore normal force at the center. When my twin sister and I were children, we were sitting together playing some kind of board game. I cannot remember exactly which game it was. The board, the pieces, and the rules have faded with time, but the moment that interrupted the game has stayed with both of us. We were probably sitting on the floor or close to it, as children often do when playing games. We had the board between us, and at some point I became convinced that my sister was trying to cheat. It was not a serious argument. We were twins, so small disagreements happened constantly. We competed over games, toys, attention, and nearly anything else that could produce a winner and a loser. If one of us believed the other had broken a rule, there would usually be a complaint, an accusation, or a small act of retaliation. That is what happened that day. I reached toward her and poked her in the stomach. It was a tiny poke. I did not shove her. I did not hit her hard. I did not stand up, put my weight behind it, or try to hurt her. I remember touching her belly with one finger or a small part of my hand, intending only to annoy her because I thought she had cheated. The force should have made her flinch, laugh, pull away, or complain. Instead, my sister flew across the room. That is how both of us remember it. Her body left the place where she had been sitting and traveled backward with a speed and distance that made no sense. She crossed the room and struck the wall. The impact was hard enough that she ended up crying on the floor. I remained where I was, with my mouth open. I could not understand what I had just seen. For several seconds, I did not even react properly. I knew how hard I had touched her. I knew I had not pushed her. Yet she had moved as though something much stronger than me had thrown her. My grandfather heard the impact of her crying and rushed into the room. He found my sister on the floor near the wall. She was upset and probably too shocked to explain clearly what had happened. He looked at the situation and came to the most reasonable conclusion. She must have fallen. Perhaps she had lost her balance while playing, tripped over something, or somehow injured herself against the wall. From his point of view, There was no reason to imagine anything else. He had not seen the beginning. He had entered only after the crash. There were two children in the room, one sitting in shock and the other crying on the floor. A child falling during a board game was ordinary. A tiny poke launching someone across a room was not. I do not remember whether I tried to explain it immediately. I may have said that I barely touched her. Perhaps I was afraid that my grandfather would think I had pushed her and punished me. Maybe the event was so confusing that I could not find the words. What I remember most is the disbelief. I stared at my hand and then at my sister. Nothing about the distance between us made sense. I had expected a small reaction. Instead, she had moved far enough to hit the wall. For years afterward, I wondered whether I had somehow caused it. Perhaps I had been much stronger than I realized. Maybe I had pushed harder than I remembered. But even a strong push from a child should not have produced what I saw. The movement felt completely out of proportion to the force. Whenever I tell the story, people assume I am exaggerating. Some laugh and say my sister must have jumped backward. Others say children do not remember events accurately. A few think I invented the story or turned an ordinary fall into something supernatural. I understand why they react that way. If someone told me they poked another person and sent them flying across a room, I would also look for a normal explanation first. The laws of motion do not change because children are playing a board game. A tiny poke cannot provide enough energy to throw a person several feet unless something else is already happening. That means either my memory is incomplete, my sister was moving on her own, or there was another source of force that we did not notice. The simplest explanation is that my sister was already losing her balance. Perhaps she was kneeling, crouching, sitting on the edge of a chair, or leaning backward when I touched her. A light poke at exactly the wrong moment might have startled her. She could have thrown her weight away from me, stumbled and fallen much farther than I expected. From my perspective, the entire movement may have looked like one continuous launch. In reality, the poke could have been followed by her jumping back, slipping, and crashing into the wall. Children move quickly, and a surprising event can be difficult to break into separate actions. The brain remembers the cause and final result. I poked her. She hit the wall. The steps in between disappear. If she pushed herself backward with her legs at the same time, most of the force would have come from her rather than me. She may have been trying to avoid the poke or exaggerate her reaction. Children sometimes pretend to be hurt during an argument. She could have thrown herself backward dramatically, expecting to land safely, then lost control and gone farther than intended. The performance became a real fall. Once she struck the wall and began crying, even she might forget that she had initiated part of the movement. That explanation would fit the argument over cheating. She may have wanted to make it look as though I had hit her hard, but my sister still remembers being thrown rather than deliberately jumping. She does not describe it as pretending. From her perspective, the movement was as unexpected as it was to me. Still, a person does not always consciously register their own reflexes. If someone touches the stomach suddenly, the body may jerk away before the mind makes a decision. A child can push hard against the floor, straighten the legs, or twist backward without remembering the muscular action. The resulting fall feels externally caused. There may also have been something slippery beneath her. A polished floor, rug, blanket, game board, loose paper, or plastic piece could reduce friction. If she had one foot planted on a sliding object, the poke might cause her to shift weight. Her legs could shoot forward or sideways, and the rest of her body could move unexpectedly. A rug might slide several feet. A cushion or low stool could tip. A wheeled chair would make an even larger movement possible. I do not remember the room clearly enough to know what was beneath us. The memory focuses on my hand, her body, and the wall. The floor has almost disappeared, but the floor may hold the entire explanation. If she was sitting on something that moved, I might interpret the motion as her body flying. A low chair could roll or slide backward. She might fall from it only when it reached the wall. In memory, the chair vanishes, and she travels alone. A child's attention would follow the person, not the object beneath them. The board game itself might have contributed. Perhaps she was leaning across the board to move a piece. When I poked her, she pulled back suddenly. Her knee or hand may have struck the board, which slid under her. Pieces scattered, and she lost balance. The movement could be much larger than the poke, because her own body was already unstable. I cannot remember whether game pieces flew across the floor. If they did, that detail may have blended with the image of my sister moving. Another ordinary possibility is that I did more than poke her. I do not like that explanation, but memory can protect a person from guilt. Maybe I was angrier than I remember. I could have shoved her with both hands and later reduced the movement in my mind to a poke. Children sometimes misjudge their own strength, especially during an argument. If she was smaller, unprepared, or off balance, a strong push might send her backward. My grandfather's belief that she had fallen may have helped me avoid being blamed. Over time, I may have remembered myself as almost motionless, because that made the event less frightening. However, my sister also remembers the light poke. If I had violently pushed her, I would expect her to remember that differently. She might accuse me of hiding what I did. Instead, both of us agree that the force seemed impossible. Shared agreement feels like strong evidence, but it is not perfect. Twins often discuss childhood memories repeatedly. We may have built the story together. One person remembers a poke. The other remembers hitting the wall. Years of retelling join those details into a single event. Each time we say, "You barely touched me," and "I flew," the phrasing becomes more fixed. Eventually, both of us remember the same sequence because we have repeated the same version for years. This is not lying. Shared memories naturally influence each other. A person may begin uncertain, hear a sibling describe the event confidently, and then absorb parts of that description. After enough time, it becomes impossible to know which details came from direct memory and which came from family retelling. The fact that we are twins may make that process even stronger. We grew up closely connected. People compared our experiences and treated us as a pair. If one of us told a story, the other often had a role in it. We may have reinforced the impossible version because it was one of those strange moments that belong specifically to us. The story became evidence of a connection no one else understood. My grandfather saw only the aftermath and gave an ordinary explanation. We remembered the impossible part. That difference may have made us hold on to it more tightly. People often become more certain when others doubt them. Each time someone said it could not have happened, we defended the details. The poke was tiny. The distance was large. She hit the wall. We both remember. Those statements became the foundation of the story. Any uncertain detail that did not support them faded. The room size may also be exaggerated. To a young child, a small room can feel enormous. The distance from the game to the wall may have been only a few feet. If my sister fell backward from a sitting position and slid, it might look like she crossed the whole room. As adults, we hear across the room and imagine a dramatic distance. But the original room may have been narrow. A person falling 3 or 4 feet could strike the opposite wall. That would still be frightening, but not physically impossible. The size of our bodies matters, too. Small children are light. A quick reflex or loss of balance can move them farther than an adult expects. If my sister weighed little and was already leaning backward, even a moderate push could have a dramatic result. At the time, I may not have understood how momentum worked. Because the touch felt small in my hand, I assumed all movement afterward came directly from it. But most of the energy may have come from her own attempt to recover. Imagine someone crouching with their feet beneath them. A surprise causes them to push backward. Their feet straighten, their body rises, and they land several feet away. The person who touched them feels only the initial contact. It appears that the touch created the movement. In reality, the startled person launched themselves. There might also have been another child or adult just outside my view. Someone could have bumped into my sister from behind at the same moment. But my memory contains only the two of us before my grandfather entered. If anyone else had been present, they would likely be part of the story. A large pet could have moved beneath or behind her. A dog running through the room might knock her off balance. Again, I do not remember any animal. The event feels isolated. That may mean no one else was there, or it may show how much the memory has narrowed. Another explanation is that the impact against the wall did not happen immediately after the poke. There may have been a chase. Perhaps I poked her, she got up angrily, stepped backward, tripped, and hit the wall. The emotional connection made the events feel simultaneous. Children often compress time when recalling arguments. A sequence lasting several seconds becomes one instant. I poke. She flies. Grandpa enters. Everything between those points disappears because it did not feel important. The more dramatic version is easier to remember and tell. There is also the possibility of a brief dissociative or perceptual effect. Stress, surprise, or fear can alter how movement looks. The brain processes sudden events in fragments. A person may seem to jump from one position to another because the observer did not register the middle clearly. This is similar to watching something happen during a blink. If I blinked or turned my head at the exact moment my sister moved, I might see her beside the board and then near the wall. My mind would connect the two positions with an impossibly fast flight. The movement felt supernatural because I missed the transition. Children are especially likely to interpret gaps in perception literally. I had no knowledge of attention, memory, or visual processing. I only knew she was in one place and then another. A neurological event is less likely, but possible. A seizure, fainting spell, muscle spasm, or sudden loss of balance could cause someone to fall violently. If my sister's body stiffened or jerked at the moment I touched her, the movement might look as though I caused it. But there is no mention of later symptoms, medical attention, confusion, or repeated episodes. She cried because she hit the wall, not because she lost consciousness. There is no strong reason to assume a medical event from one childhood memory. Static electricity cannot explain it. Sometimes people jokingly suggest that a shock caused someone to jump, but a small static discharge does not physically throw a body across a room. It might startle a person into moving quickly, which brings us back to a reflex rather than an external force. The same is true of an unseen burst of air or vibration. Nothing in an ordinary room should produce enough force to move a child that far without also moving the board, pieces, furniture, or other objects. If something physically powerful occurred, there should have been more evidence. That is why the supernatural explanation feels attractive. The event appears to contain more force than either of us created. Perhaps something invisible pushed her at the same moment I touched her. My poke became the visible trigger, but another presence supplied the real force. Maybe the room contained something that reacted to our argument. It could have thrown my sister toward the wall and left me believing I had done it. The timing would be exact enough to make the event look connected to my hand. Stories about unseen forces often include objects moving, people being shoved, or someone feeling a sudden impact with no source. Our memory resembles those stories. A child touches another child lightly. The second child flies backward. An adult enters too late and assumes a fall. Only the children know the force was wrong. But nothing else happened to support that interpretation. I do not remember objects moving by themselves in the house. There were no repeated pushes, strange sounds, shadows, or later incidents. If an unseen presence was responsible, it acted once during a small board game argument and never clearly revealed itself again. That is possible within a ghost story, but not the most likely explanation. The event could also be interpreted as a moment when the normal rules of reality briefly failed. Perhaps time skipped. Maybe my sister moved normally, but I perceived only the starting and ending positions. In that sense, she did not physically fly. My experience of the movement broke. This idea does not require a ghost, though it remains speculative. The brain can create the feeling of a discontinuity without reality actually changing. People sometimes remember a person or object appearing somewhere unexpectedly because they fail to notice the movement. The effect is more powerful during childhood because attention is still developing. I have asked myself whether my sister truly remembers the exact moment or only the impact. Her perspective would have been very different. If she remembers a light touch followed by sudden movement, that supports a startle or balance explanation. She may not remember deciding to push backward because reflexes happen before conscious thought. To her, the force would also seem external. She was touched lightly, then found herself moving. Both witnesses could sincerely report the same impossible experience, while the true cause was her own body reacting. That is probably the most convincing explanation. She was in an unstable position. I poked her unexpectedly. Her muscles reacted strongly. She pushed away, slipped, or fell. I saw the final movement, but did not understand where the force came from. She felt the movement, but did not consciously initiate it. My grandfather entered and saw what looked like an ordinary fall. All three perspectives were honest. Only the children lacked the physical understanding to reconstruct it. The word flew may also describe how fast it felt rather than literal airborne movement. She may have slid, stumbled, or fallen across the floor while remaining partly in contact with it. A child watching would call that flying. If her feet left the ground briefly before she struck the wall, the description would feel even more accurate. Over time, every contact with the floor disappears from memory. She becomes fully airborne. I still understand why the incident refuses to feel ordinary. Small family accidents usually make sense after a few seconds. Someone trips over a toy, a chair tips, a rug slides. An adult points out what happened, and the fear fades. In this case, my grandfather arrived and gave an explanation that did not match what I believed I had seen. He thought she had fallen. I knew I had touched her immediately before she moved. The cause remained attached to me. For a child, that creates a frightening question. What if I did it? What if I had some force I could not control? I may have looked at my hand afterward and wondered whether it could happen again. If a tiny poke could send my sister into a wall, then touching anyone might be dangerous. I do not remember being afraid of my own strength later, but the shock of that possibility remains inside the story. There is also guilt. Even if I barely touched her, she was hurt because the movement began during our argument. I caused the first reaction. My grandfather may have comforted her while I stood nearby, unsure whether to admit what I had done. The impossible quality of the event may protect me from a simpler, painful memory I pushed my sister, she fell, and I felt terrible. But because she agrees that the poke was small, I do not think that is the whole answer. Perhaps the truth lies between the versions. I touched her harder than I remember, but not hard enough to explain the distance alone. She reacted more strongly than she remembers. The floor or furniture contributed. The result looked impossible to both of us. Memory then removed the ordinary mechanics. Years later, only the contrast remained. Tiny poke. Huge movement. Wall, crying, grandfather disbelief. I wish I could return to the room and see the exact arrangement. Where was the board? How close was the wall? Was my sister sitting, kneeling, or standing? Was there a rug beneath her? Did she have one hand on the floor? Were game pieces scattered afterward? Did my grandfather see a fallen chair or cushion? Those details could solve the mystery. But childhood memories preserve what felt important, not what an investigator would need. I did not know to examine the floor or measure the distance. I was staring at my sister and my own hand. The absence of details makes the event feel cleaner and more impossible than a real accident usually is. That does not mean nothing strange happened. A normal combination of balance, surprise, movement, and perspective can create a result so unexpected that it feels supernatural. The human body is complicated. A small contact can trigger a large reaction if someone is already unstable. The force is not multiplied by magic. It comes from muscles, gravity, momentum, and the environment. Children see only the contact and outcome. I think that is probably what happened. My sister was leaning or sitting in a way that made her vulnerable to losing balance. I poked her. She jerked away, pushed with her feet, or slipped. The room was smaller than I remember. She crossed the distance quickly and hit the wall. My grandfather saw the aftermath correctly. She had fallen. I saw the beginning correctly. The poke was small. The impossible part existed in the missing movement between them. But there are moments when that explanation does not feel complete. My sister and I both return to the same image. She does not remember stumbling through several steps. I do not remember a chair, rug, or sliding object. I see her body move all at once. It is as though the air between the board and wall suddenly carried her. The movement is smooth, fast, and completely out of proportion. Then she is on the floor, crying. My grandfather enters and reduces the event to an ordinary fall. He did not see what came before. Nobody else believes us because the story sounds absurd. Decades later, my sister and I still remember enough of it to look at each other and know we are talking about the same impossible second. That shared certainty is not proof. Memory can be wrong. Twins can influence each other. A room can shrink and a fall can grow across years. But the memory has never changed into something ordinary for us. I can still feel the pressure of that tiny poke in my finger. There was no force behind it. No anger powerful enough to explain what happened. I touched her stomach because I thought she was cheating. Then, her body left the place beside the game. She crossed the room and struck the wall. My grandfather rushed in. My sister cried. I sat with my mouth open, staring at the distance between us. Maybe she startled herself backward. Maybe the floor was slippery. Maybe both of our memories have edited out the real movement. That is the explanation I trust most. Yet whenever we tell the story, my sister never says, "You pushed me." She says she remembers the same thing I do. A tiny poke, a sudden impossible force, then the wall. And even now, I sometimes wonder whether the strangest part was not that nobody believed us. It was that whatever moved her chose the exact instant my finger touched her, leaving both of us to spend the rest of our lives wondering which of us had actually caused it.
Before the next witness speaks, take a second to subscribe to the Blackout Witness. New stories are shared here for the quiet hours, when the house is dark, the phone is face down, and every small sound feels louder than it should. A like and a comment help the channel reach more people who enjoy real stories with no easy answers. Now, let's go back to the night everything went dark.
I was around 12 years old when this happened, living with my family in a house that was still fairly new at the time. It was not an old building with a long history, damaged floors, or decades of strange stories attached to it. The walls did not constantly creak, and there were no rumors about former owners or anyone dying there. It was simply our home. My bedroom was upstairs, while the kitchen was on the first floor. That meant getting water during the night required leaving my room, walking through the dark upper hallway, going down the stairs, crossing part of the lower floor, and then making the same journey back. Most nights, I avoided it. At 12, I was old enough to know there was probably nothing dangerous inside the house, but young enough that every dark room still felt different after midnight. A familiar hallway could seem much longer when everyone else was asleep. That night, I woke feeling thirsty. When I checked the time, it was around 2 in the morning. The house was silent. My parents and the rest of my family appeared to be asleep, and there was no television playing downstairs. I do not remember hearing traffic outside or any other noise that might have made the house feel occupied. I got out of bed and headed toward the kitchen. I may have switched on a few lights along the way, or perhaps I moved through most of the house in darkness. I cannot remember that part clearly now. What I do remember is reaching the kitchen, getting my water, and seeing nothing unusual. No one else was there. The counters looked normal. There was no reason to think anyone had followed me downstairs. I drank or filled a glass and started walking back toward the staircase. Just before I reached the stairs, I heard someone whistling behind me. The sound came from the direction of the kitchen. At first, I did not become frightened. My immediate thought was that I had accidentally woken one of my parents. Perhaps one of them had heard me moving around and come downstairs to check what I was doing. The whistling might have been their way of announcing themselves, so I would not be startled. I stopped near the bottom of the stairs and listened. The whistling continued. I called toward the kitchen. I apologized for making noise and waking them. I expected my mother or father to answer. Maybe they would tell me it was fine, ask whether I was feeling all right, or tell me to go back to bed. No one replied. Instead, I heard footsteps. They were heavy. The steps came from the same direction as the whistling, moving out of the kitchen and toward me. With every step, the whistling seemed to become louder. The two sounds were connected. Step, whistle, step, louder, step, closer. Whatever was making the noise seemed to be approaching the staircase. For a second, I remained frozen. My mind was still trying to fit the sounds to someone in my family. I had called out. I had apologized. If it was one of my parents, they should have answered. There was no reason for them to walk toward me in complete silence while continuing to whistle. The sound no longer felt casual. It felt deliberate. It was as if whoever was in the kitchen had heard my voice and begun coming toward me because I had revealed where I was. That thought broke the paralysis. I ran. I sprinted up the stairs faster than I had ever moved in my life. I did not turn around. I was terrified that if I looked back, I would see someone standing at the bottom of the staircase or already climbing behind me. The footsteps seemed close enough that I expected a hand to grab my ankle. The whistling continued while I climbed. Then, the moment I reached the top of the stairs, it stopped. Everything became silent. There was no fading sound of someone walking back toward the kitchen. No final footstep. No door closing. The whistling simply ended. I stood at the top of the staircase, breathing hard. Even though the sound had stopped, I felt watched. The upper hallway was empty, but I had the strong impression that something remained below, just outside my view. I did not want to look down the stairs. I feared seeing a face turned upward toward me. I also did not want to return to my room slowly, because that would leave my back exposed. I hurried away from the staircase and went back to bed. I may have closed or locked my bedroom door, though I cannot remember. I probably pulled the covers over myself and listened for the footsteps to return. They never did. No one came upstairs. Nobody opened my door. The house remained quiet for the rest of the night. The next morning, I questioned my family. I asked whether anyone had been awake around 2. I asked whether someone had gone into the kitchen or followed me downstairs. I asked if anyone had been whistling. Everyone denied it. Nobody admitted hearing me. Nobody had an explanation. They did not believe that the sounds were anything unusual. Some may have thought I had been dreaming, or that I had mistaken normal house noises for footsteps. To them, it was probably a frightening nighttime misunderstanding. To me, it felt much more direct. The whistling did not happen while I was lying half asleep in bed. I had already gone downstairs, entered the kitchen, collected water, and begun returning to my room. I was walking and thinking normally. I heard the sound clearly enough to call out and apologize. Then the footsteps began approaching. The timing made it feel responsive. That is the part I have never been able to forget. If I had heard only whistling, I could blame a pipe, appliance, or sound from outside. If I had heard only footsteps, I could blame the house settling. But the footsteps began after I spoke, and the whistle became louder with each step. It felt as though something had heard me. There are ordinary explanations. The first is that someone in my family was awake and simply did not remember it. People sometimes wake during the night, walk through the house, and return to bed with little or no memory of doing so. A parent may have entered the kitchen while half asleep. They could have whistled unconsciously or breathed through their teeth in a way that sounded like whistling. When I called out, they may not have understood me or may have been too tired to answer. Their footsteps then approached the stairs before they turned away. By morning, the event was forgotten. This is possible, especially if someone was sleepwalking. A sleeping person can move around, perform simple actions, and fail to respond normally when spoken to. Their movements may feel strange because they are not fully conscious. If one of my parents was sleepwalking, the silence and whistling would make sense. However, the sounds stopped precisely when I reached the top. That may be coincidence, or perhaps the person paused when I disappeared upstairs. No one in my family reported a history of sleepwalking, as far as I know, but isolated episodes can happen. Someone could also have been embarrassed and denied trying to frighten me. A sibling might have heard me downstairs and decided to play a joke. They could have hidden near the kitchen, whistled, and stamped their feet as they approached. When I ran, they stopped before I could identify them. The next morning, admitting the prank would mean confessing that they had terrified me. So, they continued denying it. That is one of the simplest human explanations. But I do not remember anyone laughing, running away, or returning upstairs through another route. In a quiet house, a prankster would need to move back to their room without being heard. If the stairs were the only route, I might have heard them climb later, unless they had already been downstairs for another reason and waited until I was asleep. The whistling could also have come from an appliance. Refrigerators, kettles, vents, heating systems, pipes, and electrical devices can produce high, steady tones. A refrigerator compressor may whistle or hum differently as it starts and stops. Water moving through pipes can create a sound that resembles a person whistling. Because I had just used the kitchen tap, pressure may have changed in the plumbing. The sound might have begun after I shut off the water and grown louder as I moved toward a particular part of the house. My own movement could make it seem as though the noise was approaching. The heavy footsteps may have been the house reacting to temperature changes or water pressure. Pipes can knock against walls. Heating ducts can expand and produce repeated impacts. A washing machine, water heater, or refrigerator can vibrate through the floor in a rhythm resembling steps. Because the house was quiet, each sound would seem louder and more human. But the building was fairly new, and I knew what the normal appliances sounded like. The noise that night did not feel like a machine. It had the pattern of someone walking. The whistle increased in volume with each impact, which gave the impression of a person moving toward me. Still, acoustics can create exactly that illusion. If a constant whistle came from the kitchen and I moved closer to the stairwell, the shape of the hallway could amplify it. At the same time, my own feet or the shifting floor beneath me might create echoes that sounded as though another person was walking behind me. A staircase can act like a sound channel. Noise from one part of a house may seem to move depending on where the listener stands. A sound reflected from walls can become louder suddenly, then disappear when the person reaches another level. When I reached the top of the stairs, the architecture may have blocked the kitchen noise completely. That would explain why it stopped so sharply. The footsteps might have been my own steps reflected back with a slight delay. Large rooms and hallways can produce echoes, especially late at night when no other sounds cover them. If I was carrying a glass and walking on a hard floor, each step could bounce from the kitchen area and return from behind me. Once I became frightened, my brain may have separated the echo from my own movement and interpreted it as pursuit. However, I remember the footsteps beginning while I was near the bottom of the stairs, before I started running. They seemed to have their own pace. They came from the kitchen and grew closer. An animal could have been involved. A pet moving through the kitchen might produce heavy sounds in a silent house, especially if it knocked into objects. A cat jumping from a counter, a dog walking across hard flooring, or a rodent inside a wall could create footsteps that seemed larger than the animal. A bird or insect near a vent might produce a whistling sound, but I do not remember us having an animal that would explain it. Even if we did, the whistle-sounding human would remain unusual. There may also have been someone outside. A neighbor or passerby could have been whistling while walking near the house. The sound might enter through the kitchen windows and appear to come from inside. As the person approached the side of the house closest to the staircase, the whistle and footsteps would grow louder. Then, when they passed beyond the building, the sounds would disappear. That explanation fits the gradual approach and sudden stop. At 2 a.m, someone walking outside would already seem strange, but not impossible. The person might have been returning home from work, exercising, or simply passing through. If the windows were closed, the sound could still travel through vents or thin areas of the wall. The footsteps may have echoed through the floor. Because I believed the sound came from the kitchen, I called toward it. The person outside would not hear or answer me. Then they continued walking past the house. The problem is that I remember the footsteps approaching directly from inside the kitchen rather than moving along the exterior. But sound location is unreliable indoors. A whistle outside can reflect from the back wall and seem to come from a different direction. Nighttime temperature conditions can also allow sound to travel farther and more clearly. The person may have been much farther away than I believed. Another possibility is that I was still partly asleep. I had awakened around 2 in the morning and walked downstairs while tired. People can perform routine actions in a state between sleep and full wakefulness. I may have been more dreamlike than I realized. A sound from a dream could continue after I left the kitchen. A hypnopompic auditory hallucination can produce voices, music, footsteps, knocking, or whistling. The person feels awake and may walk around normally, yet part of the brain remains in the dreaming state. The hallucination can appear to move through real space. I could hear whistling from the kitchen, call out, and then generate approaching footsteps because fear gave the sound a source. The moment I reached the upper floor and became fully awake, the hallucination ended. This explanation accounts for the sudden silence. It also explains why no one else heard anything. Sleep-related hallucinations do not require the person to be lying in bed or paralyzed. Some people wake, walk a short distance, and see or hear things before becoming fully alert. At 12, I would have no way to recognize that state. I would trust the sounds completely. The fact that I needed water may mean I woke suddenly from deep sleep. The dark journey downstairs, the silence, and the fatigue created ideal conditions for the brain to misinterpret noise. Still, I remember feeling fully awake. I knew where I was. I got water successfully. I spoke clearly. That does not rule out a partial waking state, but it makes the event feel less like a dream. Fear itself can build a pattern from ambiguous sounds. The whistle may have begun as an appliance or distant noise. When I called out and received no answer, I became alert. Normal creaks then sounded like footsteps. As each sound occurred, I expected the source to come closer, so the whistle seemed louder too. My attention became focused entirely on the kitchen. The brain is capable of increasing the apparent intensity of a sound when it is treated as a threat. The noise may not have changed much. My fear changed how I heard it. Once I ran upstairs, my own movement and breathing overwhelmed the original sound. At the top, when I stopped listening from the same position, it seemed to have ended. The feeling of being watched afterward may have been the natural result of adrenaline. When people escape a perceived threat, the body does not calm immediately. The nervous system remains prepared for danger. Every shadow seems occupied. The person feels that something is nearby even when the area is empty. That sensation is not evidence that anyone was watching. It is the body waiting for the threat to reappear. But there is a reason the supernatural interpretation remains tempting. The whistling seemed to answer my presence. It began behind me. I spoke. Then the footsteps came. The sound did not remain in the kitchen like an appliance. It approached. Many ghost stories involve whistling at night because it sounds human while revealing nothing about the person making it. A voice would provide age, emotion, and words. A whistle provides intention without identity. Someone is there, breathing and choosing a tune, but the listener cannot see them. The heavy footsteps gave the whistler a body. The growing volume made it seem aware of me. The sudden stop at the top of the stairs made it seem bound to the lower floor or unwilling to follow farther. It is easy to imagine something standing at the bottom after I escaped, watching from below. But I did not see a figure. No door moved. No object was disturbed. Nobody else experienced anything. There is no evidence of a ghost beyond the sounds and my fear. A new house can still have strange acoustics, but it does not need a history to produce them. The idea that only old houses can feel haunted comes mostly from stories. Any quiet building can create confusing noises. New timber settles. Pipes shift. Air moves through vents. Appliances cycle. The unfamiliar sound may have been part of the house's normal operation that I had never heard at 2 in the morning. During the day, voices, traffic, televisions, and movement would hide it. That night, the entire house was silent enough for the sound to become clear. I have tried to remember the tune. Was it a recognizable melody? Was it only one long note? Did it rise and fall like someone casually whistling? I cannot recover that detail. I only remember that it sounded human. That uncertainty matters. If I could remember a clear tune, a person outside or inside would be more likely. If it was a steady tone, plumbing or ventilation would make more sense. Memory preserves the frightening interpretation, but loses the technical details that could solve it. The same is true of the footsteps. I remember them as heavy, but not how many there were. Perhaps there were only 3 or 4 knocks. Maybe the first sound came from the refrigerator, the second from a pipe, and the third from the floor. My mind turned separate noises into someone walking. Over time, the sequence became smoother. The whistle grew louder with every step. That may be exactly what happened, or it may be how the story organized itself afterward. I do not think I invented the event. I heard something. I became frightened for a real reason. The question is whether the source behaved the way I remember. The most reasonable explanation is a combination of late-night fatigue, house acoustics, and ordinary mechanical or outside sounds. A whistle entered or formed near the kitchen. Repeated knocks sounded like footsteps. When I called out and received no answer, my fear connected them into one approaching person. Running upstairs changed my position and ended the sound. My body remained alarmed, creating the sense of being watched. That explanation covers every part without requiring anyone to be in the house. I believe it is probably correct. But when I return to the memory, it never feels like pipes. I am 12 again, standing near the foot of the stairs with a glass of water. Behind me, someone whistles in the kitchen. I assume it is one of my parents. I call out and apologize for waking them. For one brief moment, there is silence. Then a heavy foot lands on the floor. The whistling becomes louder. Another step follows. Louder again. Whatever is there is not answering because it does not need to. It has heard me. It knows where I am. I run before it reaches the hallway. The stairs blur beneath my feet. I do not look back. The whistle follows me upward until I reach the top. Then it stops so suddenly that the silence feels like another sound. I stand there, certain something remains below. Maybe it was a neighbor walking past. Maybe the pipes and walls performed a perfect imitation of a person approaching. Maybe I carried part of a dream down to the kitchen with me. Those explanations are all possible. But even now, the part I cannot easily dismiss is the timing. The whistling was strange, but I was not terrified until I spoke. I called into the dark and apologized. Then the footsteps began. Whatever made them may have been ordinary. Yet in that moment, it felt as though something in the kitchen had been waiting quietly until I let it know I was listening. A few years ago, I lived with a roommate in a small college town. At the time, my roommate worked third shift, so there were many nights when I had the house completely to myself. That was normal for me. I would lock the doors, settle in with my dogs, and spend the evening playing video games or watching something until I became tired. The town was quiet at night, but it was not empty. Because it was a college town, people kept unusual schedules. Students walked home late. Cars came and went at strange hours. There were also plenty of animals moving around the neighborhood. Cats wandered between houses. Dogs sometimes escaped from gardens or slipped out of collars. Raccoons got into rubbish, occasionally. Something larger, would appear at the edge of the street and disappear before anyone could identify it. Seeing an unfamiliar animal outside was not automatically frightening. That is why the first appearance of the black dog did not seem like a serious event. One night, while I was home alone, I walked to the front door and looked outside. I do not remember why I went there. Maybe I heard something near the house, expected a delivery, or simply glanced through the door while passing. In the middle of the street stood a black dog. It was facing the house. More specifically, it appeared to be staring directly at it. The dog was not walking across the road or sniffing along the pavement. It was not searching through rubbish or following someone. It simply stood in the street and watched. I could not make out many details because it was dark. I remember the overall shape and the black coat, but not the exact breed. It looked like a normal dog in size and build, at least from where I stood. There was nothing obviously unnatural about its body. The strange part was its stillness. It did not seem confused or lost. It stood as though it had chosen that exact place because it wanted to look at my house. Even then, I tried not to make too much of it. Dogs escape. A loose dog might stop in the road after seeing movement behind a window. It could have been watching my dogs, smelling food, or waiting for someone who had passed through the area earlier. Perhaps it had lived nearby and knew one of the residents. There were many possible explanations. Then I noticed that my own dogs were not reacting. Normally, they barked at almost anything outside. A person walking too close to the house could set them off. Another dog on the pavement would usually bring them running toward the door or window. Sometimes they barked before I even realized anything was there. They heard sounds I missed and smelled animals long before I saw them. But that night, they paid no attention to the black dog. They did not lift their heads. They did not approach the door. There was no barking, growling, whining, or restless movement. It was as though nothing stood outside. That bothered me more than the dog itself. I looked from the street back toward my dogs, waiting for one of them to notice. Nothing happened. The black dog continued facing the house. Eventually, I shrugged it off. Maybe the windows and walls blocked the dog from their view. Perhaps it was too far away for them to smell. If it remained silent and still, they might have had no reason to notice it. Dogs are observant, but they do not react to every animal in the neighborhood. I went back to whatever I had been doing, probably playing video games. I did not watch to see where the dog went. When I checked later, it was gone. The encounter should have ended there. A loose dog had stood in the street for a few minutes and then wandered away. That happened. A few days later, however, I looked outside again. The black dog was back. It stood in the same place. Again, it faced my house. Again, it appeared to be staring directly at it. And again, my dogs did not react. The second appearance made the first one harder to dismiss. It could still have been the same ordinary stray. Dogs develop routines. If it lived nearby, the street may have been part of its regular path. Maybe someone in my house had fed it in the past. Perhaps the previous residents had owned a black dog, and this animal was returning to a familiar place. But it did not approach the pavement or front garden. It did not come to the door and ask for food. It remained in the road. It watched. That became the pattern. I do not remember exactly how many times I saw it. It was not necessarily every night, but it kept happening for around a month. I would be home alone because my roommate was working. At some point, I would look outside. The black dog would be in the middle of the street, facing the house. The position seemed nearly identical each time. Sometimes I wondered whether it had been standing there long before I looked. Maybe it arrived soon after my roommate left. Maybe it waited until the house became quiet. There was no way to know. My dogs never acknowledged it. That remained the part I could not understand. A single failure to react could be explained by sleep or distraction. Repeatedly ignoring the same strange dog felt different. Even when I knew it was outside and looked toward my own dogs for confirmation, they behaved normally. They could not see what I saw, or they did not consider it worth noticing. The dog also seemed to appear only when I was alone. I never saw it when my roommate was home. It did not show itself when friends visited. Nobody ever stood beside me at the door and saw it in the street. Its timing made the experience feel personal. When another person was present, the road remained empty. When the house belonged only to me and the dogs, the black animal returned. I knew that could be coincidence. My roommate worked third shift frequently, so I spent many more late-night hours alone than with company. Naturally, unusual events at midnight were more likely to happen while I was the only person awake. Friends may have visited at different hours, when the dog did not normally pass. Still, after enough appearances, I began anticipating it. Whenever I approached the front door, part of me expected the black shape to be there. Sometimes I checked and saw nothing. Those empty nights should have reassured me, but they did not. Instead, I wondered whether the dog had decided not to appear because I was looking for it. On nights when it was there, the sight caused an immediate drop in my stomach. The street would look normal in every other way. Parked cars remained where they belonged. Porch lights glowed outside nearby houses. There might be a faint sound of traffic from farther away. Then, at the center of that ordinary scene, the dog stood completely black against the road. It always seemed aware of the house. I never remember seeing it with its head turned toward another sound. It did not watch passing cars or look down the street. Its attention remained fixed in my direction. I tried to estimate whether it could actually see me. If the inside lights were on, the glass might reflect the room and make it difficult for me to see outside clearly. But from the street, my silhouette would be visible. Perhaps the dog saw movement near the door and stared because of that. If I stood still, it may have continued trying to understand what I was. Its gaze might have felt deliberate, only because I knew I was being watched. I had a good friend living nearby, so I eventually asked him whether he had noticed a black dog in the neighborhood. He had no idea what I was talking about. He had not seen one standing in the road. He did not know of anyone nearby who owned a dog matching my description. That did not prove much. Neighbors can live only a short distance apart and still notice completely different things. He may not have looked outside at the same times. The dog could approach from the opposite direction and leave before he saw it. Maybe it belonged to someone who kept it indoors during the day and allowed it out late at night. But I had hoped my friend would say he had seen it too. I wanted the dog to become part of the neighborhood instead of something that appeared only for me. His confusion made the situation worse. I had always been interested in folklore and creepy stories. Because of that, I already knew about legends involving black dogs. Different regions have different versions. Some stories describe enormous black hounds seen on lonely roads near crossroads, outside churches, or along the edges of forests. They may be treated as warnings, guardians, spirits, or signs of death. In some tales, the dog follows travelers without making a sound. In others, it appears only to one person. Sometimes the animal is described as unnaturally dark, as though light does not touch its coat. The stories vary, but the image is consistent enough to be memorable. A black dog appears where it should not be. It watches, then it disappears. Once those stories entered my mind, seeing the animal became much more frightening. Before, it had been a strange dog. Now I began wondering whether it was one of the things I had read about. The details seemed to fit too easily. It came at night. It stood in the road. It appeared when I was alone. Nobody else saw it. My own dogs ignored it. That last detail felt especially important. Animals are often supposed to sense things humans cannot. If my dogs barked, I could say they had noticed a real animal. Their silence allowed a more disturbing interpretation. Perhaps they did not react because there was no normal dog outside. Maybe what I saw did not have a smell or sound they recognized. Perhaps the black figure existed only for me. I knew that was folklore shaping my thoughts. Once people learn a frightening story, ordinary details begin to support it. A stray becomes an omen. A coincidence becomes a pattern. An animal's stillness becomes intelligence. The fact that nobody else sees it becomes proof that it is supernatural rather than evidence that the sighting may be mistaken. I tried to remain rational. The most likely explanation was still a real dog. It may have belonged to someone nearby. A black coat can make an animal difficult to see, except when it stands beneath a streetlight or against lighter pavement. The same dog could pass many houses without being noticed. If it regularly wandered late at night, I might be one of the few people awake to see it. Its repeated location could have a practical cause. There may have been a smell in the road. Food could have been dropped there. An animal might have marked the spot. The dog could have been listening to something beneath the ground or across the street. From my angle, it appeared to stare at the house, even if its attention was slightly to one side. Dogs do not need to look directly at something to monitor it. Its ears and nose may have been focused elsewhere. The road might also have been warm after the summer day, making it a comfortable place to stand. Perhaps the dog paused there during a regular route. The repetition only seemed meaningful because I noticed it. My own dog's lack of response had several possible explanations. The front door and windows may have reduced the scent. If the black dog stood across the street without barking or moving, there might be little sound to attract them. They may have become used to its presence. Perhaps they had seen or smelled the animal during the day and no longer considered it a threat. Dogs do not bark at every familiar neighborhood animal. It is also possible that they reacted in subtle ways I did not recognize. An ear might turn, a nose might lift. They may have been aware of the dog without barking. Because I expected a dramatic response. Anything less looked like complete indifference. My attention was focused outside, not on their smallest movements. The lighting could have created an illusion. A black rubbish bag, shrub, mailbox, hydrant, or other object might resemble a sitting or standing dog from inside the house. Shadows from parked vehicles could form a body and head. If the streetlights came on at the same time each evening, the same shape might appear repeatedly in the same location. A small movement in tree branches could make the silhouette seem alive. But I remember the dog as standing on four legs, not as a vague object. I believed I could see its body clearly enough to recognize an animal. It may also have moved slightly. Still, nighttime vision is unreliable. Human eyes see less color and detail in darkness. The brain fills missing information using familiar shapes. A dark object in the street becomes a dog, because that is the most reasonable interpretation. Once I labeled it, I saw the same animal every time. I never walked outside to examine the spot. I did not shine a strong light on it or take a photograph. The image remained at the same uncertain distance. A photograph would have helped. If the camera showed a dog, the mystery would end. If it showed nothing or only a shadow, that would also provide an answer. But when I was alone at night and already thinking about black dog legends, going outside did not feel sensible. I did not want to approach it. Even a normal stray could be aggressive, sick, or frightened. There was no reason to risk being bitten simply to prove it was real. I also did not want to draw its attention more directly. It already seemed to be looking at the house. Opening the door might invite it closer. The dog's black color probably contributed greatly to the fear. A white or brown dog in the same place might seem lost or harmless. Black animals disappear into night. Their faces become unreadable. Eyes, mouths, and expressions vanish. You cannot tell whether the dog is calm, frightened, or preparing to attack. All you see is the outline. Folklore often uses black dogs because darkness removes the ordinary qualities that make a domestic animal familiar. A dog is normally associated with companionship and protection. A featureless black dog standing silently outside reverses that feeling. It becomes something unknown, wearing a familiar shape. I sometimes wondered whether it was waiting for me to come outside. It never moved toward the house while I watched. It did not run away either. It stayed in the road, maintaining a distance. That behavior could belong to a nervous stray. The animal may have wanted help or food, but remained afraid of approaching. A dog separated from its owner might watch a lit house because it associated people with safety. Perhaps it returned because it hoped someone would notice. My fear may have prevented me from helping an ordinary lost animal. That possibility bothers me. If it had a collar, I never saw it. If it was hungry or injured, its stillness may have come from exhaustion. The same dog could survive outside for weeks, following a predictable route and pausing at houses. My dogs might ignore it because it behaved submissively and never entered their territory. A person who knew more about animal behavior might have seen sadness rather than menace. There is also the possibility that it was not a domestic dog. A coyote can look dog-like in poor lighting. Dark fur or heavy shadow might make one appear black. Coyotes often move through towns at night and stop to watch houses. They can remain still for long periods while assessing danger. My dogs may not react if the animal stayed downwind and silent, though many dogs would probably notice. A fox, wolf-like dog, or another wild canid could produce the same silhouette. If it used the street as a travel route for a month, repeated sightings would make sense. College towns often border less developed land, and wildlife adapts quickly to urban environments. The fact that the animal never appeared when people were outside would support a cautious wild animal. It may have waited for the neighborhood to become quiet. The pattern of seeing it only when I was alone may partly come from memory. I remember the frightening sightings because I was alone. If the dog appeared when my roommate was sleeping, I may still have felt alone and later grouped those nights together. Perhaps someone visited earlier in the evening and left before I checked. Only when I was alone may mean that I noticed it during quiet moments, not that the animal somehow knew who was inside. I also cannot remember the exact number of sightings. It may have appeared 3 or 4 times across a month rather than constantly. The phrase "a month straight" describes the period, not necessarily every night. Fear compresses repeated events into a stronger pattern. Once I expected the dog, each sighting confirmed the story. The nights it did not appear became less memorable. This is confirmation bias. We notice and remember evidence that supports an idea while giving less weight to what does not. After learning or remembering black dog folklore, I may have unconsciously organized the sightings around it. The dog became more consistent, more silent, and more focused in memory. The neighbor's failure to see it became part of the mystery. My own dog's lack of response became supernatural evidence. The folklore did not create the original animal, but it shaped the meaning of everything afterward. There is a more psychological possibility. Because I was alone late at night, tired and focused on video games, I may have been in a state where shadows and brief movements were easier to misinterpret. Screens affect night vision. After staring at a bright monitor, Looking into a dark street can leave temporary afterimages and reduced detail. A patch of darkness may seem solid. A mailbox or bin can become an animal until the eyes adjust. If I looked outside only briefly, I might never correct the first impression. This could happen repeatedly, because the lighting and objects remain similar. But I remember looking long enough to feel watched. I did not see the shape only in the corner of my eye. I went to the door and looked directly at it. The dog was there. At least, that is how the memory remains. A sleep-related explanation seems less likely because I was not waking from bed. I was active, walking around the house and playing games. Still, exhaustion can affect perception even when a person is awake. Third-shift households often have irregular schedules. If I stayed up late, my attention and vision might be unreliable. Stress, anxiety, or lack of sleep could make an ordinary sight feel threatening. None of that explains why the shape returned to the same position unless a real object or animal was involved. The simplest answer is still that a real black dog lived or wandered nearby. One night it noticed movement in my house. It stopped in the street and stared. I happened to see it. Over the next month, it used the same route several more times. My dogs either did not notice, did not care, or were separated from it by enough walls and glass that no reaction occurred. My neighbor kept a different schedule and never saw it. Eventually, the dog stopped coming because its owner found it. It moved elsewhere, or its routine changed. Nothing supernatural happened. That explanation fits all the facts without requiring a spirit. It is the explanation I would probably give someone else. Yet the experience did not feel like watching a lost dog. The atmosphere was too consistent. I would be alone. The house would be quiet. My dogs would remain calm. Then I would look outside and find the black animal in the same part of the street, facing me as if it had been waiting for the moment I checked. The supernatural version is that it was one of the black dogs from folklore. Perhaps it was a warning or watcher. It did not attack because that was not its purpose. It only appeared to make itself known. The fact that it remained for a month could mean it was attached to the house, to me, or to something happening during that period. Maybe it was protective rather than threatening. Some black dog legends describe guardians that accompany people or appear near dangerous places. Others treat them as omens of death or disaster. Nothing terrible happened afterward that I could clearly connect to it. There was no tragedy that explained the visits. That weakens the idea of an omen. If it was supposed to warn me, I never understood the warning. If it was guarding the house, I never saw what it guarded us from. The folklore provides a frightening image, but no useful conclusion. That is one reason I try not to treat the stories as literal. A real animal does not need a message. It can stand in the road for reasons that make sense only to itself. The old legends may have begun with encounters exactly like mine. Before streetlights and cameras, travelers saw black dogs on lonely roads. The animals watched silently and disappeared into darkness. Some were strays. Some were farm dogs far from home. Some were wolves, foxes, or shadows. Because the witness could not explain the encounter, the story became supernatural. Repeated over generations, the animal gained glowing eyes, impossible size, and connections to death. My dog did not need to be a spirit to fit the beginning of that process. I saw something real, but unexplained. My knowledge of folklore supplied the rest. The most unsettling part remains the behavior of my own dogs. Even after considering walls, distance, scent, familiarity, and subtle reactions, I still find their silence strange. They reacted to animals I could not see. They barked at ordinary pedestrians. Yet the black dog stood directly across from the house, without causing any response. Perhaps they were asleep in another room. Maybe I remember their indifference more strongly than it happened. One of them might have looked toward the door and then settled again, but in my memory, they behaved as though the street were empty. That contrast gave the dog a quality of separation. I could see it, they could not. Or perhaps they could see it and knew something I did not. Dogs sometimes ignore animals they recognize. Maybe the black dog had visited during the day while I was away. My dogs had already encountered its scent and accepted it. Its nighttime appearances were mysterious only to me. That is an ordinary possibility I cannot test now. I eventually stopped seeing it. There was no final dramatic encounter. It did not approach the front door or leave anything behind. It simply ceased appearing. One night I looked outside and the street was empty. The next time was the same. Eventually, enough time passed that I realized the month-long pattern had ended. That absence should have relieved me. Instead, it created another question. What changed? Did the dog find its way home? Was it hit by a car? Did someone take it in? Did it move to another street and begin watching a different house? Or had whatever brought it there finished? I never found out. Years later, what remains is not an image of a monster. It is an image of an ordinary-looking dog in an ordinary street, behaving just strangely enough that I could not stop thinking about it. That is often more effective than something obviously impossible. If the dog had been enormous, had glowing red eyes, or vanished in front of me, I could place it firmly in a supernatural story. Instead, every individual detail has a reasonable explanation. Stray dogs wander. Black coats disappear in darkness. Animals stare at houses. Neighbors miss things. Pets sometimes fail to react. The mystery exists in the repetition and timing. It happened often enough to feel intentional, but not clearly enough to prove anything. I still picture myself walking toward the front door late at night. The glow from my game remains in the room behind me. My roommate is away at work. My dogs are quiet somewhere inside the house. I look through the glass. The street is nearly empty. In the middle of it stands a black dog. Its body forms a dark shape beneath the streetlight. Its head is raised toward the house. It does not bark. It does not wag its tail. It does not wander away. I look back at my dogs. They do not move. When I look outside again, the animal is still there. Maybe it was only a stray that liked standing in that spot. Maybe the light and angle made it seem more focused on me than it was. That is probably the truth. But during that month, whenever I was alone, I could not escape the feeling that the dog was not lost. It knew exactly which house it had come to watch. And whatever my own dogs normally sensed outside, they never once warned me that it was there. About a year ago, I was driving home late at night. It was close to midnight, and the neighborhood was almost completely quiet. It was summer, so the air was warm, and there had not been any rain for several days. Nothing about the drive had been unusual. I knew the area well. I had traveled the same roads many times, and I was already thinking about parking, going inside, and ending the night. As I approached my home and prepared to pull into my parking space, I noticed someone walking along the sidewalk. The person was not far away, but they had their back to me. At first, I saw only a dark shape moving beneath the streetlights. Then I realized that the person was carrying an umbrella. It was an enormous black umbrella. It seemed much larger than the kind one person would normally carry. The fabric spread so widely that it concealed most of the walker's upper body. I could see part of their back and legs beneath it, but not enough to tell whether the person was a man or a woman. I believe they were dressed entirely in black, although the umbrella covered so much of them that I cannot be certain. The person walked extremely slowly. They were not moving with the ordinary pace of someone trying to get home. They did not seem tired, hurried, or distracted by a phone. Each step appeared deliberate. The umbrella remained raised above them, even though the sky was clear. There was no rain. It had not rained earlier that evening, and the ground was dry. There was no obvious reason for anyone to carry such a huge umbrella at midnight. That was what first made me uncomfortable. An umbrella is an ordinary object. Seeing one during a rainstorm would mean nothing. Seeing someone use one on a sunny afternoon might also make sense as protection from the heat. But there was no sun at midnight. There was no rain. The person was walking beneath a wide black canopy in darkness, when the umbrella served no visible purpose except hiding them. I slowed down as I prepared to park. For a few moments, the vehicle and the person moved through the same quiet space. I watched the back of the umbrella. The walker did not turn around. They did not react to the sound of my engine or the headlights behind them. They continued at the same slow pace. That almost made the sight worse. A person walking alone at midnight would usually be aware of an approaching car. They might glance over a shoulder, step farther from the road, or at least change their posture slightly. This person seemed uninterested. They did not appear afraid of being approached from behind. They also did not seem curious about who had arrived. They simply kept walking. The umbrella made it impossible to see their head. I could not tell whether they were looking straight ahead, down at the ground, or toward the houses beside them. I could not see the shape of their shoulders clearly enough to estimate their age. The person became less like an individual and more like a moving silhouette. A large black dome floated above slow, moving legs. I remember feeling deeply uneasy, although the person had done nothing directly threatening. They had not approached my vehicle. They had not spoken to me or tried to enter anyone's property. They were only walking. Still, every part of the scene felt out of place. The time was wrong. The weather was wrong. The pace was wrong. The umbrella was far too large. The area where I lived was not a place where people regularly took midnight walks. During the day, residents might walk dogs, exercise, or visit neighbors. By 12 o'clock, the sidewalks were normally empty. The houses were dark, and most people were inside. A lone person would have stood out even without the umbrella. With it, they looked almost staged, as though someone had deliberately placed a disturbing figure in the street. I tried to think of a reasonable explanation while I parked. Maybe they were returning from work. Perhaps they had been carrying the umbrella all day and did not have anywhere else to put it. They might have used it to protect themselves from the sun earlier and were now taking it home. A person can own an unusually large umbrella without there being anything suspicious about it. It may have been a golf umbrella, which is wider than a standard one. Maybe the walker lived only a short distance away and did not care how strange they looked. But that explanation did not completely settle the feeling. Why keep it open? A closed umbrella would be much easier to carry. Holding a huge open one creates resistance, blocks vision, and makes walking more difficult. There was no practical reason to leave it raised unless the person wanted protection from something. No rain was falling. No sunlight existed. What were they protecting themselves from? Or what were they trying to prevent others from seeing? I remained inside my car longer than I normally would have. I do not remember whether I turned the engine off immediately or waited until the person had moved farther away. I watched as they continued down the sidewalk. Their pace never seemed to change. The umbrella hid any movement from the waist upward, so I could not see arms swinging naturally. The entire shape seemed to glide rather than walk, although I could clearly see legs taking steps beneath it. Eventually, the person moved beyond my view. They may have turned a corner, passed behind a tree, or simply entered an area the streetlights did not reach. I did not follow. I did not get out of the car to ask whether they needed help. There was no clear emergency, and approaching a stranger alone at midnight would not have been sensible. I waited until I felt comfortable enough to leave the vehicle and go inside. The encounter lasted only a short time, but the image stayed with me. Even afterward, I kept trying to explain the umbrella. One possibility is that the person was using it as a parasol. Some people avoid direct sunlight because of sensitive skin, medical conditions, medication, or personal preference. They may routinely carry large umbrellas during summer. If the walker had been out since daylight, the umbrella could simply have remained open from habit. But at midnight, that still seems inconvenient. They might have forgotten it was open, though that would be unusual. Another possibility is that they were protecting themselves from insects, falling leaves, birds, or something in the trees. A large umbrella could shield a person from bats, bird droppings, sap, or debris. In some areas, sprinklers activate late at night, and a walker may know that certain lawns spray water across the sidewalk. The person could have opened the umbrella to avoid being soaked. Maybe they were passing beneath trees that released insects or moisture. I had not noticed anything like that, but the walker may have had a reason known only to them. The umbrella could also provide privacy. Perhaps the person was uncomfortable being seen. They may have had anxiety, wanted to avoid cameras, or simply disliked attention. A wide umbrella can hide the face from passing cars and houses. Someone wearing clothing they did not want neighbors to see might use it as cover. A person leaving a party, hospital, or workplace could have been emotionally upset and wanted to walk without being recognized. The darkness and umbrella may have given them a sense of safety. What looked threatening to me might have been protection for them. They might also have been unhoused and carrying most of their belongings. A large umbrella could function as shelter, whether or not rain was currently falling. They may have been moving between places and kept it open because it created a small private space. If they had nowhere secure to sleep, an umbrella could provide a feeling of separation from the environment. The slow pace might come from exhaustion, illness, injury, or heavy belongings hidden beneath it. Their dark clothing may have been chosen for practical reasons rather than to appear frightening. There is also a chance the weather was not as clear as I remember. A light mist or brief drizzle can be difficult to see through a windshield at night. The person may have felt raindrops before I noticed them. Summer weather can change quickly, and isolated drops may fall even when the ground remains mostly dry. Maybe they expected rain based on the forecast. If they had been caught in an earlier shower somewhere else, they might have kept the umbrella open in case it returned. The fact that it had not rained for days in my immediate area does not mean no rain fell nearby. Another explanation is protection from sprinklers. Many residential irrigation systems run late at night to reduce evaporation. A person who regularly used that route might know that several lawns sprayed the pavement around midnight. A large umbrella could keep their clothes dry. From inside my car, I may not have noticed water crossing the sidewalk. That explanation is practical and fits the summer timing. The umbrella's size could also be distorted by perspective. Because I was behind the person and seated low inside a vehicle, the umbrella may have blocked more of their body than it normally would. A standard golf umbrella can look enormous when viewed from a short distance. Darkness removes the details that show scale, so the black shape may have seemed larger than it really was. My headlights could have created a sharp silhouette, making the outline appear more solid and unnatural. The person's pace may also have looked slower because I was moving in the same direction. If I approached gradually while parking, our relative movement would be small. Someone walking at a normal speed can appear almost stationary when observed from a slowly moving car. Once I became uncomfortable, every step may have seemed deliberate. Fear changes perception. The umbrella did not necessarily move unnaturally. I was simply watching it with increasing attention. The person's failure to look back may have been ordinary, too. They could have been wearing headphones. The umbrella might have blocked some of the engine noise. They may have heard the car but chosen not to react because vehicles arrived in the neighborhood regularly. Turning toward headlights can be unpleasant at night, so they might have kept facing forward. A person walking alone may deliberately avoid eye contact with drivers for safety. What I interpreted as eerie calm could have been caution. The all-black clothing may also be uncertain. At midnight, colors become difficult to distinguish. Dark blue, brown, gray, or green can all appear black under streetlights. The umbrella casts additional shadow over the body. I may remember the clothing as completely black because it matched the overall image. The person became a single dark shape in my memory. There is a more concerning human explanation. The person may have been using the umbrella to conceal their identity or actions. A huge open umbrella could block security cameras and prevent people from seeing what someone carried. The walker might have been approaching a particular house, watching the neighborhood, or trying not to be recognized. Dark clothing and a midnight walk would support that possibility. Someone planning theft or another crime might move slowly while observing homes and vehicles. The umbrella could hide their face from doorbell cameras. This is one reason the encounter may have triggered my instincts. Even if I could not consciously identify suspicious behavior, the combination of concealment and unusual timing suggested that the person did not want to be seen. But the walker never approached my property. They did not stop near a door, look into a car, or test a gate. As far as I saw, they stayed on the sidewalk and continued moving. It would be unfair to assume criminal intent based only on clothing and an umbrella. Many harmless people appear strange when observed without context. The person might even have been participating in a photography project, performance, or personal ritual. Perhaps someone was taking pictures farther away, and the umbrella was part of a costume. Maybe they were returning from an event. A large black umbrella could be used in theater, dance, or fashion. At midnight, the event may have just ended. What looked bizarre in the neighborhood could have been completely normal somewhere else earlier that night. There is also a chance that the figure was not walking alone. Someone shorter, such as a child, might have been beneath the umbrella but hidden from my angle. The large canopy could have protected two people. If their steps matched, I might see only one set clearly. Perhaps a parent was walking home with a sleeping child or helping someone injured. The slow pace would then make sense. The umbrella might provide privacy while they dealt with a difficult situation. Because I could see only the back, I had no way to understand what was underneath. The uncertainty itself made the sight frightening. An umbrella usually reveals enough of a person to identify them. This one concealed almost everything. The mind dislikes incomplete human shapes. A person without a visible head or upper body becomes difficult to categorize. The brain knows someone is there, but cannot read a face, posture, age, or intention. That removes the signals normally used to decide whether a stranger is safe. The figure becomes anonymous. In darkness, anonymity easily becomes threat. The scene also resembled familiar horror imagery. A lone person dressed in black, a deserted street, a slow walk at midnight, an oversized umbrella hiding the face. Even if I was not consciously thinking of a particular film or story, I had seen similar images before. My brain already knew how such a scene was supposed to feel. That cultural familiarity may have intensified the discomfort. The person did nothing supernatural, but the silhouette matched the visual language of a ghost story. The supernatural interpretation would be that the umbrella was not protecting the person from weather at all. Perhaps it concealed something that could not appear openly. The figure walked only at night and kept its upper body hidden because its face was wrong, missing, or not human. The umbrella created a portable patch of darkness that moved with it. The person did not react to the car because it was either unaware of ordinary danger or completely confident that nothing could harm it. The slow pace suggested it had no destination and no reason to hurry. It was simply moving through the neighborhood. That idea is frightening because the umbrella becomes part of the entity rather than an object it happens to carry. A black dome travels through the dry summer night, with only legs visible beneath it. But there is no evidence for that conclusion. I never saw the person's face. I did not witness them disappear unnaturally, move without touching the ground, or do anything physically impossible. They walked out of sight in an ordinary way. The encounter was strange because of context, not because the person violated reality. That distinction matters. An unexplained sight is not automatically paranormal. Sometimes the observer lacks the one detail that would make everything sensible. Perhaps the walker had recently undergone a medical procedure and needed to avoid artificial light. Certain people are extremely sensitive to light because of migraines, eye conditions, or medication. Streetlights and headlights might cause pain. A large umbrella could shield them from overhead lighting and passing cars. Dark clothing might reduce reflected light. Their slow pace could come from illness or poor vision. If that were the case, their behavior was not eerie at all. They were simply trying to move safely through the night. Maybe they had a skin condition that required complete protection, even after sunset, because certain artificial lights caused discomfort. Perhaps the umbrella was lined with material designed to block ultraviolet light, and carrying it had become routine. I would have no way of knowing. The person could also have been grieving. Some people walk late at night because they cannot sleep. They may choose unusual clothing or carry objects connected to someone they lost. A black umbrella can have associations with funerals, mourning, and privacy, though those associations may only come from my own imagination. The slow pace might reflect sadness rather than menace. A stranger's private pain can look frightening from a distance because the observer sees the behavior without the cause. The simplest answer remains that an ordinary person had an ordinary reason that was not visible to me. That explanation is probably true. But the encounter stayed with me because it interrupted the expected pattern of the neighborhood. We rely heavily on normal patterns to feel safe. People walk dogs in the morning. Children play in the afternoon. Residents return home in the evening. Rain brings umbrellas. When someone appears outside those patterns, the mind becomes alert. A person walking at midnight is unusual. A person doing it beneath a huge open umbrella during dry weather is more unusual. A slow, hidden figure becomes something the brain cannot immediately explain. The discomfort was not proof of danger. It was a response to uncertainty. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if the person had turned around. A visible face might have ended the mystery. Perhaps I would have recognized a neighbor or seen an ordinary, tired adult. Maybe they would have smiled, and the entire scene would become slightly embarrassing in memory. Or perhaps the face would have made the encounter worse. Part of my fear came from not knowing. The umbrella allowed my imagination to fill the empty space. Anything could be beneath it. The person could be young or old, harmless or dangerous, familiar or completely unknown. Because I never found out, every possibility remained. I also wonder whether the walker noticed me watching. They may have seen my headlights and known exactly where my car stopped. Perhaps they deliberately avoided turning because they did not want to frighten me. If someone is dressed unusually, they may be accustomed to staring. They might have kept walking to show they were not approaching. From their perspective, I was the stranger sitting inside a vehicle, watching them at midnight. They may have felt just as uncomfortable. That reversal makes the encounter less sinister. Two people briefly shared a quiet street, each unsure of the other. I had the protection of a locked car and nearby home. The walker had only the umbrella. Maybe carrying it open made them feel safer around passing vehicles. A large umbrella can create distance and make it harder for someone to approach closely. It can also function as a shield if threatened. The person might have chosen it precisely because walking alone at midnight felt dangerous. What frightened me may have been their method of protecting themselves. Still, the image remains unsettling. The vehicle slows. The street is nearly empty. The summer air is dry. Ahead, a black umbrella covers most of a figure moving along the pavement. There is no rain striking the fabric. No water runs along the road. The umbrella never tilts back enough to reveal a head. Only dark clothing and slow legs appear beneath it. The figure does not acknowledge the car. It does not hurry. It does not stop. It passes through the streetlights, one section at a time, becoming visible and then dark again. I know that people sometimes do things that make sense only to them. The umbrella may have protected them from sprinklers, insects, bright lights, or unwanted attention. They may have been carrying it home from somewhere. Perhaps it was broken and stuck open. Maybe they were testing it, filming something, or simply enjoyed walking beneath it. Any of those explanations is more likely than something supernatural. But I understand why the encounter stayed with me. It was the kind of scene that seemed to exist without an explanation. There was no conversation afterward, no neighbors saying they knew the person, and no second sighting that made the behavior ordinary. The figure entered my view already walking and left it the same way. I witnessed only a small section of a story. Whatever happened before and after remained hidden beneath the umbrella. The more I thought about it, the more the object seemed less like protection and more like concealment. It covered the person from above, even though there was nothing in the sky to avoid. It blocked the face from anyone looking out of a house or passing in a vehicle. Its size made the walker appear wider and less human. Perhaps that was never the person's intention. But intention is difficult to judge when the face is hidden. About a year has passed, and I still cannot provide a satisfying answer. I did not take a photograph. I did not circle the block or watch where the person went. I cannot describe their height accurately because the umbrella distorted their outline. I cannot say whether they wore a coat, dress, or loose clothing. I do not know whether the umbrella was truly as huge as it appeared. The memory contains only the details that first disturbed me. Midnight, dry summer weather, a nearly empty neighborhood, black clothing, a massive black umbrella, a person walking far too slowly. The reasonable part of me believes they were simply an eccentric night walker with a personal reason for using the umbrella. People are complicated, and strangers rarely provide explanations for their behavior. There is no need to turn every unusual person into a threat or apparition. But the emotional part of the memory has not changed. When I picture that night, the figure never reaches a home. They never close the umbrella. They never step beneath a brighter light and become an ordinary person. They remain exactly as I first saw them, moving down the sidewalk with their back toward me. The umbrella covers their head and shoulders completely. The dark clothing blends into the night. Their feet take one slow step after another. Nothing falls from the sky, yet the huge black canopy stays open. And as I sit inside the car trying to decide whether it is safe to get out, I cannot stop wondering whether the umbrella was there to protect the person from something above them, or to protect everyone else from seeing what was underneath.
The lights may be back on, but that does not always mean the danger is gone. Every person you heard tonight had one thing in common. They saw, heard, or felt something that changed the way they looked at darkness forever. Tell me in the comments which story stayed with you the most. Subscribe to the Blackout Witness for more true stories from the moments people wish they could forget. And tonight, before you switch off the last light in your room, look twice at the window.